Nearly 4 in 10 American adults have metabolic syndrome right now. 4 in 10. And the majority of them have no idea. Not because they haven't seen a doctor, because the standard blood panel most doctors run is not designed to catch this. Metabolic syndrome has no symptoms in its early stages. You don't feel it, you don't see it, but it is methodically increasing your risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, stroke, fatty liver disease, and early death every single day it goes unaddressed. So today I'm going to tell you exactly what it is, how it's diagnosed, and why your doctor may have missed it, and what the evidence says you can do to reverse it. No medication is required, and we're not going to give you any type of exotic protocol. I'm just going to give you information you should have had years ago. So metabolic syndrome is not a disease. Understand that. It's a cluster of 5 metabolic abnormalities that tend to occur together, and that together dramatically increases your risk of serious illness. The diagnostic criteria comes from the National Cholesterol Education Program, which are endorsed by the American Heart Association. So you meet the threshold for metabolic syndrome if you have 3 or more of the following 5 markers. So first is an elevated waist circumference, so over 40 inches for men, over 35 inches for women. Second is going to be elevated triglycerides, so 150 milligrams per deciliter or higher. Third is going to be a low HDL cholesterol, so under 40 for men, under 50 for women. Fourth is going to be elevated blood pressure, so anything 130 over 85 or higher. And then the fifth is going to be elevated fasting glucose, 100 milligrams per deciliter or higher. Now, I want you to notice something about those numbers. A fasting glucose of 100, a blood pressure of 130 over 85, and triglycerides of 150. None of those will get you a phone call from your doctor. However, they will come back on your lab report stamped as normal or at most borderline. But 3 of them together, that is a clinical definition of a syndrome that doubles your risk of cardiovascular disease and multiplies your risk of type 2 diabetes by 5. So let me give you some actual numbers from a peer-reviewed research article. So a study was published in Circulation, which is the flagship journal of the American Heart Association, and it followed over 3,000 middle-aged adults for 8 years. Here's where the findings were. Men with metabolic syndrome had nearly 3 times the risk of cardiovascular disease compared to those without it. And the second thing they found was the risk of developing type 2 diabetes was nearly 7 times higher in men with metabolic syndrome. And then separately, the clinical consensus from the American Heart Association stated that metabolic syndrome doubles your risk of developing cardiovascular disease over the next 5 to 10 years. Think about that for a sec. 5 times the diabetes risk, double the heart disease risk from a cluster of numbers your doctor considers borderline. This is exactly why I keep coming back to the same point across every video on my channel. The gap between normal and optimal is where chronic disease begins. Now I want to talk to you about something that almost no one explains clearly. When your lab results come back, there's 2 columns, right? You have the results, and then you have the reference range. Now, that reference range, try to say that 5 times fast, is not what's optimal for your health. It is a statistical range of results seen in a general population, which, as we just established, has a metabolic syndrome prevalence of nearly 40%. So in other words, normal is defined by a population that is largely metabolically unwell. So let me show you what it means with specific numbers. So starting with the fasting glucose, the lab normal range is between 70 to 99 milligrams per deciliter. So in other words, normal is defined by a population that is largely metabolically unwell. Do you see the gap? You have a fasting glucose of 98, triglycerides of 145, and HDL of 42, and every single one of those will come back marked as normal. And yet, you are 1 marker away from meeting the clinical definition of metabolic syndrome and are already operating well below optimal on every front. See, metabolic syndrome doesn't appear randomly. It develops from a predictable set of drivers. And if you've been watching this channel, you'll recognize most of them because the primary driver of it is insulin resistance. So when your cells become resistant to insulin signal, which I covered in depth in a previous video, the consequences cascade across every metabolic marker. And this happens simultaneously. So your liver produces more glucose, your triglycerides rise, and your HDL falls, and your blood pressure climbs, and then visceral fat starts to accumulate. All 5 metabolic syndrome markers worsen from one root cause. Now, the 4 lifestyle factors that drive insulin resistance and therefore drive metabolic syndrome are these. Number 1 is going to be chronic consumption of refined carbohydrates and ultra processed foods. Second is going to be physical inactivity, particularly absence of regular zone 2 cardiovascular exercise. Third thing is going to be chronic sleep disruption. Even mild sleep restriction measurably impairs insulin sensitivity. And the fourth thing is going to be chronic psychological stress. Sustained cortisol elevation directly promotes insulin resistance and visceral fat. None of those are surprising. What is surprising though is how fast these markers move in the wrong direction when all 4 are present simultaneously, which describes the average modern lifestyle and unfortunately is reality. So here is the evidence of how we can reverse this framework naturally. First is going to be nutrition. So the research consistently points toward a whole food, plant-forward diet as the most effective dietary intervention for improving all 5 metabolic syndrome markers simultaneously. So specifically eliminating refined carbohydrates and ultra-processed foods, prioritizing high fiber whole foods like legumes, leafy greens, nuts, seeds, and reducing added sugar to pretty much 0. Now, this is not a calorie restriction protocol. However, it is a food quality protocol. Second is going to be exercise. So as I mentioned, zone 2 cardiovascular exercise, which is a sustained moderate intensity where you can hold a conversation but are breathing noticeably, and the single most evidence-backed lifestyle intervention for improving insulin sensitivity and reducing visceral fat is zone 2 cardiovascular. Third is going to be sleep. 7 to 9 hours of consistent quality sleep is not optional for metabolic health. It's actually load-bearing. So studies have shown that even 5 nights of mild sleep restriction, so 6 hours per night or less, measurably impairs insulin sensitivity in an otherwise healthy adult. Fourth is going to be stress regulation. So chronic cortisol elevation is a direct metabolic threat. It's not a lifestyle inconvenience. So evidence-supported interventions include structured breath work, consistent sleep timing, getting out into nature, and deliberate social media connection, all of which demonstratively lowers cholesterol and improves metabolic markers over time. So these 4 interventions applied consistently have been shown to, in clinical research, to reverse metabolic syndrome, not just manage it. It actually helps reverse it. So here's what I want you to take away from this video. If you have had a blood panel in the last 2 years, pull it out. I want you to look at your fasting glucose, your triglycerides, your HDL. I want you to also check your blood pressure from your last visit. Then I want you to go ahead and measure your waist circumference, not your pant size, your actual waist circumference, so at the navel level there. Then ask yourself how many of those 5 markers are sitting close to or past the threshold I just gave you. If the answer is 2 or more, you do not have a lifestyle inconvenience. You have early metabolic syndrome and are heading directly toward it. See, this is the exact conversation I have with every client on their first consultation. We go through your labs together. We identify exactly where you stand against both the diagnostic thresholds and the longevity optimized targets. And we build a personalized protocol with nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, all designed around your specific picture. So not just a generic program, a protocol built for you. I work with a small number of clients one-on-one each month. The link to apply is in the description below. Now, spots are limited and they fill relatively quickly.